I'm just as pleased as I can be to have on the split screen next to me, composer, musician, recording artist, Jeff Johnson. And we'll talk a little bit about his career. We're talking almost, not quite, about a half a century of music making, composing, recording, being his own boss, which, as we know, cuts both ways. And so, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. It's wonderful to be with you and also with this group of people that you have been with for the last year. I've popped on just kind of quietly from time to time. Last week, I watched a little bit more. But the fact that you've been doing this for how many weeks? I mean,
Well, this is number 46 out of the last 47 weeks.
That's astonishing to me. That's fantastic. Anyway, and I know a lot of people come to this. It's really kind of like church in some respects.
Well, and I didn't want to admit that to myself because I've always maintained that I'm a minister with a lowercase m.
Yeah.
In other words, I have the same ministry obligation as everybody. I'm not a pastor or a teacher in search of a venue. But the fact of the matter is I wind up doing, I wind up kind of stepping in and setting the table and people come. And
yeah.
So anyway, well, it's very cool to have you aboard. So, okay, this is a completely cliche question to start, but it's a tried and true. Tell us a little bit about your background. Now, you live right now on Comito Island in Washington, is that right? You and Susie?
Right. And I got to make sure I'm clear with everyone. I don't live here. This is not my living room here that I'm in right now. But as we'll get to, I've got this new album coming out with Phil Keaggy that's called Ravenna, and the mosaics of Ravenna, Italy are part of the inspiration. So I thought in the course of our interview, I would just flash a few of these. I mean, you're the pro at this, but I thought I'd flash a few of these as we go along, just so people can have a sense of the beauty of some of these mosaics there. So anyway, this is not my living room, but yeah, you're right.
I thought maybe you'd gone on one of those home redesign shows or something. It's like, wow.
Yeah, I know. Although the echo would be a bit broader in my voice right now if that was the case.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Susan and I moved up here with our daughter Haley 20 years ago. We lived in Portland, Oregon, which is where we all grew up. And yeah, I kind of had a typical upbringing in the sense that grew up in a big, actually maybe not typical. I grew up on a big farm my grandparents had, and started doing music pretty early. My mom and dad were very musical. Went to a fairly large American Baptist church in downtown Portland. We lived about 20 miles southwest of Portland. Had lots of not only opportunities there, but more importantly, I had just some wonderful mentors throughout my life there. I had a very positive experience growing up in the church. Now, I will say that I grew up with a number of friends who, for some reason, did not find their experience as positive as I did. And I have no idea why that was the case, as far as in my own personal experience, but that was the case. So, yeah, consequently, my kind of early plan was to do my music, but also to become a pastor. I really had a wonderful, I was involved in a really great youth ministry. And so I was really inspired to continue to do that myself. I met Susie when she was 13 and I was 15. And we did not go to the same school together. We weren't in the same neighborhood. We met, I know this sounds weird, but we met in a play in downtown Portland. It was a play that was going to be a benefit, or it was a benefit for raising money for the research of DMSO. Do you remember that? That was that stuff you'd spread on. I mean, now lots of sports medicine uses it.
Yes. And
it's a long story, I won't bore you, but anyway, they put a call out to do this big production. They're going to raise money for it. And I, being the young thespian that I was when I was 15, went in and of course got a part, everybody got a part. And Susie was in what became the Portland Ballet Company, but it was very early on. And she's 13. And so they got asked to dance there. And this was such a weird situation because it was really, low budget. I mean, we were at the Civic Auditorium where we would do the rehearsals, but the block rehearsals, the movement rehearsals were done in the basement of a Catholic church where there was all these pillars and stuff. And then the singing was done at a mortuary where we would all be in the chapel of a mortuary working on the parts. So anyway, that was the backdrop. Susie and I continued that relationship on and on again, off again. She would say, she would actually have a lot to bring to this succession right now that would be cast me in a rather negative light. But anyway, long story short, we ended up getting married when she was 18 and I was 20. And that really kind of set things in motion. For us in lots of different ways.
Now, were you already pursuing music in some kind of a career path at that moment when you guys got married?
Well, career path. Music's always been a part of what I am. I mean,
now, were you, and I have to ask you, forgive me for interrupting, but I want to get to this while we're still in this part of the timeline. When you were growing up, was music? You said you grew up in a fairly rich environment, music-wise, in the home. But was it a forced piano and now I'm glad, or were you pretty much all in, right from the start?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, I had a lot of piano teachers. I even had several voice teachers. I can read music to a point, but my ear was so strong that, I was so used to writing my own music from a very early age. I remember the first song I can remember is after a visit as a youth to Disneyland. And I wrote about a young girl I saw at Disneyland, but it sounded very much like a Neil Young tune. But I can remember it. I think the words went something like, "That'll really be the day, JJ, that you get that girl," something like that. I can't remember the rest of it, but but my point is that I was used to working out the seasons of my life in my writing, in my songs.
Yeah.
And so it was, to get back to your question, it was natural for me to be in a situation where I was doing music, not just with the youth choir, but also writing music and performing music in certain situations. And as I also said, at the church, I was given lots of opportunities to do that. And at school, I had tons of opportunities to play my own music. So it was very natural for me. And I started recording my own music with another guy. We had a 2-track sound on sound tape recorder, and we would go back and forth. And our parents would let us set stuff up, and we would make records. Well, I mean, not records literally, but we would make our albums. And I would say that was as early as, 13, 14 years old. So yeah, that's how it started. So the real track, the real direction was, there came a point right after I was married where the writing was such, and I was thinking about going to seminary. I was in Portland State University and taking a lot of classes to kind of prepare me for maybe a postgraduate seminary degree. But I just started having more and more opportunities to do my music. And most importantly, Susie had a real job. Her dad was a dentist. She worked for him. And Susie worked for nearly 38 years of our married life, off and on. And that's really, bottom line, that's really what allowed me to keep the consistency of music as a vocation over all these years, because it's been feast or famine.
Now, you're one of the few guys that I know whose vision to like start and maintain your own label. We were talking a little bit before we got started, sort of inside baseball music stuff 30, 40 years ago, making your own custom album without a label. This was kind of the kiss of death. This was the immediate evidence that you didn't have what it took to get signed to an actual label. These days, it's a badge of honor. I made my own record. I kept my publishing. I own my recordings. All the guys in suits, go take a hike. I'm out there doing my stuff.
Yeah.
But when we were young guys, it was exactly the opposite perception. So what got you through the door of saying, and the other part that occurs to me, and this may be a little too inside baseball for our viewers, but I have to ask because I got to know. When ARC started, was it an actual standalone label? Did it function as a production house when you got involved with other labels? Did you lease masters, or did you, you know what I mean? Get us under the hood a little bit of how that started.
Well, part of it, Bob, to be very honest, was I was a very presumptuous young person, and I thought I could do my own label.
Uh-huh.
And I look back on it now, just I have to laugh actually, and maybe cry too. But I think anybody actually who does music as a vocation has to be pretty presumptuous, because here's the presumptuous part: you get up in the morning and you say to yourself, I might be able to write and record something today that somebody might not only listen to, but might purchase. That's very presumptuous, I think.
Yeah.
And so I had a friend named Scott Heibel. And Scott also was presumptuous like me. And Susie and I, the deal in our family, we had a farm I mentioned earlier. There was an old farmhouse, and if the newlywed couple in the family could live in that farmhouse for free, for rent free for a year, and then they would have to pay rent. But usually you kind of moved on from then. Susie and I stayed there 20 years. We did eventually pay rent, right?
Uh-huh.
But it had the second floor, and this is the house I grew up in as a kid until I was 11 years old. My parents built a house across the street behind my grandparents. It had an attic that was just really a storage area. And so Scott and I built a little studio up there. Well, we didn't build anything. Well, we built a few walls and things, but we got scrap carpet from our church because they had just replaced their carpet. So we took all the old carpet and put it in there. It was really low ball. I mean, we did everything.
And was this like 2-inch tape machines and all that kind of stuff?
No. This was a Tascam 8-track machine, 1/2-inch 8-track machine.
Oh, got it. Okay.
We had a Tascam 8-track machine. We had a Tascam board. I don't remember what the model number is. And we had like maybe we had a reverb unit. I can't remember what it was, but we had a couple things and a couple mics. We had one really good microphone. Oh, and by the way, I was also working in a studio then. I was working in a downtown studio. That's really where I cut my engineering chops. I learned a lot there about editing and recording. And then also I started working with a guy named Sandy Simpson, who ended up collaborating with me on a lot of the early ARC Records releases. And Sandy and I were part of a commercial writing group called Alpha 7 in Portland. And we wrote a lot of jingles and some soundtrack work. There again, I learned my craft from all those experiences of composing, recording, production ideas, working with other musicians, creating charts, those kinds of things. That all started almost about the same time as I started this record company. But man, if you were to listen to my first 2 recordings, the first one was called The Anvil of God's Word. And the second one was called Please Forgive Us, Lord, which are very hilarious just to think about. But if you were, and you can actually hear some of those songs, I hesitate to say on my Bandcamp page, I've had so many people ask me about them that I finally just put up a compilation of songs from those 2 albums, but mainly to show people where I came from. Because when you compare the music and the production and all these things like that now that I'm making with that, it's significant. And
sure.
And you know what? I'm not embarrassed by that. That's in some respects, by doing it on my own, I ran the risk of just kind of putting it out there and I had no sense that someday I might regret these early recordings.
Yeah. And I tell people that there are songs and recordings of mine that I like better than others, as we're looking back 30 or 40 years now.
Right.
But it's like looking through an old photo album.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't wear those kind of pants anymore, but this is what I was wearing at the time, and that's what it looks like.
And here's the other thing that I've grown to appreciate and realize in the course of my 40 plus years of making music is some of that music for the listeners of the time, that some of that music was really important for them, and it remains important for them, even though as an artist I've moved way beyond it. You've moved way beyond it.
But yeah,
But
but
some of those
see,
songs.
you and I as listeners, and of course, what people need to remember is that before you become a music maker, you're always an avid music listener.
Absolutely.
No
Oh
one
yeah.
decides to become a musician because it's a good gig and there's lots of money to be made, and you're camped out next to a record player or something, and you're taking everything in.
Oh yeah, you know,
And
Sandy and I used to, the studio was upstairs, like I said, but that's also where the record player was. That's what, and we had these two really nice monitor speakers downstairs in our living room. And so when we got a new record, I could, like, for instance, great example, when we got the Alan Parsons project, the one on the Edgar Allan Poe theme.
Tales of Mystery Imagination.
Tales of Mystery Imagination. I would say, okay, everybody ready? So there'd be a bunch of us down in the chairs and whatnot in front of, in perfect placement in front of the speakers. And I'd say, everybody ready? Yeah. So I'd run up to the stairs, I'd drop the needle carefully, and then I'd run down the stairs and we'd listen to the entire side. And then, and we just, we did that all the time.
Nobody has listening parties anymore.
Exactly. That was the listening party.
It was, yeah. To this day, one of my favorite things to do in this world is to get a few people together and go round robin and say, play me something that either is kind of an anthemic or a totem for you, or play me something that's got your current interest and tell me why.
Right on.
And it's just one of my favorite things to do in this world.
And you know, I think that's something that led me early on to audiophile recordings. I was really taken. You know, like for instance,
half speed vinyl.
Well, just you know, you'd go to, like, back then you'd go to like a really good stereo shop, not a record store, but a stereo component shop, right?
Yeah.
And you'd go in there and they'd have the latest, you know, coolest speakers, right? Which you could never afford, but they'd be happy to play stuff. And guess what the things they'd play? Well, they'd be records that were kind of audiophile type records. So I started getting kind of knowledgeable about that stuff. And, you know, so that was the early Fresh Air recordings. Remember that?
Yes,
Mannheim
Steamroller, sure.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, hey, I want to do that. I want to make that kind of record. And I started doing more research. So those early ARC pressings, not those first two records, but in the 80s, starting with The Face of the Deep and Through the Door, those were really high quality pressings. They were done at a place called Wakefield Manufacturing down in Arizona, I think it was. And it was the same place that Mannheim Steamroller was pressing their stuff. It was the same place that some of the jazz labels and Windham Hill was pressing.
And I can't fill a thimble with what I know about this. I don't know very much at all.
Yeah.
But I assume the audiophile meant things like the speed they'd be cutting at, or perhaps the composition of the vinyl and the way the stampers were done.
Yeah, in this case, it was the quality of the vinyl. The packaging was always in one of those rice paper sleeves.
Yes.
And it was
like Japanese pressings.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was really cool. And the interesting thing is that actually got the attention of Billy Ray Hearn and Bill Hearn at Sparrow. And this was like 1984. I got a call out of the blue from Bill Hearn's secretary. Now, he was, for those of you who don't know, he was the head of Sparrow Records and really one of the pioneers in Christian music, and an amazing guy. Bill was a great friend of mine, and unfortunately he passed away a couple years ago. But Bill was in Germany. And he was having a meeting with his German distributor, Volker Rittinghaus. And Volker said, hey, have you ever heard of this guy named Jeff Johnson? And he goes, well, yeah, I've kind of heard of him. He says, well, you know, I know some people over here that love his records and their audiophile recordings and blah, blah, blah. And Bill goes, oh, interesting. So, and Volker says, I'd love to bring him in to Germany. Could you put me in touch with him? So I get a call out of the blue from Bill's secretary. And so Sparrow just basically generously offered to kind of put me in touch with these guys. And in the course of that, I just said, Sandy and I just finished what we called an instrumental demo. Windham Hill was just starting to take off. We had been doing a lot of commercial writing. We had lots of instrumental stuff. So we had put together this demo, and I said, hey, would you guys be interested in hearing this? And they said, hey, send it on down. So I sent a cassette of what would become No Shadow of Turning, the album No Shadow of Turning. And a week later, Susie and I are having dinner and the phone rings and it's Billy Ray Hearn, who I've never met. And he, he's talking to me about this recording, saying, "This is fantastic. We've been talking about starting an instrumental label like Windham Hill, and we'd love to license this from you." I go, "Great, cool. How do we do that?" That's how my whole real professional relationship started with Sparrow, was through that. And
but you also had a direct connection though with Windham Hill for a while.
Not yet. The connection with Windham Hill came later, because in the late 80s, I met a guy named Brian Dunning, who's this amazing Irish flute player, was in the band Night Noise. And I got it here again. By this time, my daughter was, 3-4 years old. And I was at Powell's bookstore, which anybody who's into books will know Powell's.
It's Book Disneyland.
Disneyland in Portland. I was in Powell's bookstore. I was looking for a couple books for Haley, and I came across this book called The Tale of Three Trees, and it was an absolutely gorgeous picture book with this wonderful story, and the publisher was a British publisher. So here again, this is me. I contact the publisher and I said, "Is there any chance that I could create an audio book with music, original music on this?" And they said, "Sure." And by this time I was with Sparrow, so I had that behind me, so that helped.
Right.
But in the course of making that, I hired Brian to play flute on it. And Brian Night Noise was based in Portland, and Brian and I hit it off. And the publisher loved so much what we did, they had this new book coming out by this guy named Steve Lawhead. And they said, "We got this new book. Would you be interested in maybe doing a soundtrack in relationship with the book?" And so there's a long story behind this, which I'm not going to tell right now. But in the course, I met Steve, he and Alice are to this day some of our best friends. And while talking to Steve and Alice, he said, "Well, how are you going to make this Celtic? You're obviously not, that's not you." I said, "Well, I just started working with this guy named Brian Dunning." "Brian Dunning, Night Noise? Oh, he's one of our favorite artists. Night Noise, we love Night Noise." So the die was cast, and Brian and I have started, we've been working together for like 30, 35 years, since then. So, Bob, one thing, again, to go back to the presumption, because I can't emphasize that enough. The very early on, 1977, I had these 2 early records out, right? And they said, "Well, you got to do a tour." Well, Eastern Airlines had this deal where the companion, $321, 2 people could fly anywhere Eastern Airlines flew for 21 days. Okay, as many flights.
Goodness.
Okay, so I got my soon to be deepest, greatest friend, but during the course of the trip, the friendship was challenged. But my friend David Hastings to go with me, who was a pastor, but he could take the weeks off. The way I booked this tour, I went to the Multnomah County Library, big library, kitty corner from First Baptist, downtown Portland. I go into the section that has the yellow pages, and I write down various churches' numbers in various cities, corresponding with various cities that Eastern Airlines flew to. And I literally cold called them out of the blue. And I put up,
you are my hero.
Is that crazy? I mean, I look back at that. You could make a TV sitcom on this tour. I mean,
my goodness.
We were everywhere. Yeah. So 23 flights in 21 days. Yeah. So it was amazing.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, sorry, I really got off track there, but
no. This is great stuff.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Gosh, we got so much to talk about. I'm probably going to break this up into 2 nights because it's just we're having too much fun here, and I can't imagine leaving very much of this on the cutting room floor. So when I remember back when the Christian labels realized that something was happening with Windham Hill and those types of labels, and God help us, and I don't mean this to be uncharitable, but it was like, well, we should do a Christian one of that.
Yeah, it's true.
And so that was both the good news and the bad news. It gave us places to go and an outlet to do music with people that we knew.
Yeah.
But then when that led to your association with Windham Hill, I know that how do I put this? This is such a huge subject. Um, our our worst impulses sometimes, I think, in the faith are to draw unnecessary us versus them lines in the sand. I mean,
I know where you're going with
I
this.
think
I
there
know
are
where you're
parts.
going.
I think there are parts of Scripture that say you're unique.
Yeah.
You're not to be married to the systems and the thoughts of this world in a bad way. But a lot of times, so if you're out there and you have an association with Windham Hill, you're reaching people that are never going to darken the four corners of a church. They're not going to have a potluck meal under a steeple. And you're reaching them with music, and then the friendly fire from our brethren goes, well, you're just a new age artist. You're out there making that new age music. How in the world did you deal with that? And I'm assuming that's mostly in the rearview mirror, but I don't know.
Well, yeah, I knew you were going in that direction. And it's funny. I was doing the interview with John Thompson at True Tunes just the other day, and he asked the same question. And to be honest, I haven't had to answer that question for a long time.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Good.
Maybe
good.
it's just because I'm so obscure that nobody cares anymore. But
well, that's not good. But
but by the time I was actually recording music with Brian for Windham Hill, I had quite a lot of experience with doing instrumental recordings, and this subject had come up many times. As a matter of fact, when Sparrow finally put out the first Meadowlark recordings, which included our album and John Michael Talbot, beautiful album, and Richard Souther.
Right.
That's really was the launch of his career.
Yeah.
Richard Souther, aka Douglas
Trowbridge.
But and that's when I met Richard. And he and I are still great friends. I'm trying who what was
and then Maranatha did the same thing with
Maranatha
Colors,
did the same things
because
and
that was Smitty Price, Jeff Lambs,
and
Tom Howard.
And didn't Phil do
Phil did a Wind in the Weed, I think, was his entry into that. Yeah.
No, the fact is, here's the deal. Just let me, I know you and I are often ridicule Christian music as being imitative, but the fact was that, okay, they were imitative in the sense that there was this surge of contemporary instrumental recordings that were being some of those Windham Hill records that we were on earlier on, they sold 500,000 units. I mean, there are some serious sales. Well, Sparrow, Maranatha, they're not stupid business people. And so, but here's what I'll say is a lot of those early recordings on Meadowlark and on Colors, they're really good recordings in the genre.
Oh, yes.
They're fantastic recordings, but what happened was, Sparrow did not anticipate some of the pushback, I might say in quotation marks.
They underestimated the...
Well, they just didn't estimate at all. They hadn't thought about it. They were purely going for it as a business model. And also, at least my experience with Sparrow, they were always interested in putting out quality. So, so to them, the priorities were, this makes sense as a business, and what we're going to do is going to have a high quality to it, right?
Right.
And we want to work with artists that we really believe in that haven't taken, okay? So they covered those bases, but they hadn't thought about the sense that this was actually being put in the new age bins in the record stores.
Right.
And Meadowlark, I don't know about Colors, but Meadowlark was everywhere. It wasn't in just Christian bookstores. It was everywhere. So, well, they started getting letters and they started getting calls, and they didn't really know how to respond. Well, I had been doing this kind of thing for a couple of years, and so
and I'm assuming the letters and calls were not irreligious people saying, "What's this Christian stuff doing?"
No.
I got a feeling it was on the opposite side of that.
It was on the opposite side. It was people asking questions like, this is instrumental music. It's called New Age music. What does that have anything to do with Christian music or worship? Or they were very, very, very nervous about the New Age moniker. And at that time, what a lot of people don't realize is New Age music kind of started from a fairly Eastern spiritual, things for practicing yoga, meditation. That's really its roots were there. So there was a legitimate, shall we say, Eastern spirituality kind of undercurrent in New Age music. It's
Right.
not that anymore. As a matter of fact, I don't even know what the genre means anymore. But so long story short, Sparrow asked if I would respond to some of these. And here's the thing. Here is my experience. In 98% of the time, I would write and say, well, first of all, let's talk about instrumental music. I mean, there's a guy named Bach who wrote a lot of instrumental music, and that he was very much in the Christian tradition, wasn't he? And furthermore, this idea of contemplation, meditation, I seem to see a fair bit of that in the language of the Psalms. And I would just say, I didn't say it like that snarky. I would say it in a very respectful way of just saying, have you considered looking at it from this angle? Because that's the angle I look at it from.
Right.
And you know what? 98% of the time, people would say, I never thought of it that way. This is great, or, okay, that's cool. I don't know if I'm really kind of into it, but I get it, So most fires were put out that way. So interestingly enough, as time went on and I found myself with Windham Hill, I have to say there was never really any situation where somebody asked, or gave me a hard time about my Christian worldview. I mean, they knew where I was coming from.
Right.
And yet, again, as far as they were concerned, it was really all about the music. And did they like the music?
Yeah.
Did the music fit in what they wanted to release? But behind the scenes, I had many interesting conversations with interviewers, with record staff people who would say, so you're a Christian, huh? What? I grew up in the church. It wasn't so great. Tell me about your experience.
Yeah.
Lots of it, even to this day. I mean, I was doing an interview with Phil the other day with a fantastic programmer who I've known for many, many years. And he asked us off the record, you guys are both Christians. I know that because I've known you guys a long time. And what do you think about all the stuff that's going on right now? So talk about a loaded, but it was off the subject. And I said to Phil, I said, John, this person's really in earnest to hear our answer about this. So
Yeah.
we did the best we could in the context.
I should say, because I don't want to, I joke about being cranky and Lord knows I'm capable of it. But I think my sensitivity about the copycat thing is only because I have a particular time. I was part of a record label at one time that when the whole aerobics craze hit,
yeah,
they put my songs on an aerobics album. So in other words, I'm playing Matters of the Heart, Baby Smiling for it. And then there's a woman's voice over my recording going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And,
wow.
And
That's
I
just like,
so I think I see this through a very narrow cast lens.
That's got to be worked in. That's got to be worked into that sitcom on my tour. That we got to work that part in somehow in the storyline.
but you know what? You've done a really nice job of giving us a window into the glass being half full on all that stuff. So yeah. I think that's great.
Well, and at the end of the day, frankly, I have to say this, and this has always been one of my mantras, is at the end of the day, I'm really only trying to impress myself with my music. I'm trying to satisfy myself, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that might sound narcissistic to some people, but I don't mean it. I really don't think it is. It's, I don't really care actually what people think about my music to a certain point. It's wonderful when people say that they like your music. More importantly, it's amazing actually when somebody says, just the other day I had a person say, we just lost our parent and we were listening to your music during the whole time. And it's like,
yeah, you can't.
Those are you can't anticipate that. But when they come, you can just kind of revel in it. And
when you get to the honor of being part of somebody's soundtrack, either in joyful times or completely sorrow times.
That's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it.
Is really, yeah. My line for years is I'm making soundtrack music for a movie I'm not directing.
Wow, that's great. Yeah,
and,
let me steal that from you.
Well, let's move ahead to your first encounters with the venerable Mr. Keaggy.
Yeah.
How did that work out? How did you meet Phil and how did you guys begin collaborating?
Okay, I have to say one thing. My first encounter with Phil Keaggy, early on in my musical career, I also was doing a lot of stained glass work and design. Now, it became very apparent after a few years that working with glass with your hands and being a musician were not totally compatible. So I eventually moved on from that, particularly after I had a major sheet of glass just completely burst in my hands. Yeah. No injury.
Can't even hear that.
Yeah. So, but the reason I'm saying all that is I always listened to music when I was doing my glass work. And one of the early albums that I listened to many, many times was Master and the Musician. And so there was this guy that I knew about. I mean, and then I would listen to a bunch of Windham Hill stuff. In other words, I didn't see Phil's Christianity really had nothing to do with my draw to him. I mean, I knew about him through friends who were Christians who had introduced me to his music, but that wasn't the aspect of the music that drew me to it. It was just the music and and the musicianship of that music. Anyway, that was my first exposure to Phil. Then years later, I think we're talking about 2001, 2002, I started getting asked to do a bunch of work for youth specialties at their youth specialties conventions.
Okay.
And because at that time I had my Celtic trio, I was working with Brian and John Fitzpatrick, violinists from Belfast, and youth specialties would bring those guys over and we'd play at their conventions, and then we would do their services at nighttime. And so I'd always have a fair bit of time on my hand. And I was hanging out one night with Tick Long, who was one of the people who started, Tick. And Tick said, have you ever heard Phil Keaggy in concert? I said, I haven't. Hey, so he says, Tick said, he's playing tonight. Let's go hear him, at the convention.
Yeah.
So we go over and Phil's doing, his loop-de-loops and just,
this is probably back when he was using an analog Echoplex.
Oh God, it was mine, as a person who's fairly technically knowledgeable about how some of these things get done, it was mind-boggling to see the gymnastics and the chances that he would take musically. And so it was all done. And Tick says, hey, you want to meet him? I said, oh God, I'd love to meet him. And so we went backstage, and I still remember this. Phil, who's already fairly short, he was on the ground putting his guitar in his case. And Tick comes up and says, hey, Phil, I want you to meet a friend of mine. His name's Jeff Johnson. And Phil stops and he looks up to me and he says, are you the Jeff Johnson that did the record with David Friesen, Inner Voices? Just like that. I'm just, Phil, as you know, I know you know Phil. Phil has a catalog. He has an incredible memory.
Yeah.
And I go, yeah. And he stood up and he said, you have no idea what that music has meant for me. He says, in my touring, I come home after being on the road, I lay on the ground in my living room, put my headphones on, and I would listen to that record over and over again. And I went, whoa. So that was our first introduction.
Well, there you go.
And so then years later, a mutual friend of ours, Tom Galata, suggested that we put together maybe some music. He was doing an audiobook of Buechner's reading Godric. Okay.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And he wanted to have some music, some program music. And so he asked Phil, because he's friends with both of us, hey, would you guys like to collaborate on something? So we did. We created a piece of music, but just sent it back and forth. And to be honest, I'm not sure. We must have mailed a disc or something back, because it was really early internet. So I don't think we could have sent files back and forth.
Yeah.
It would have been too big. So anyway, and then we officially were at Laity Lodge. Phil was kind of the featured musical guest, and I was leading worship for this small group. And he and I and his wife Bernie was there, Bernadette, and my wife Susie was there. We just hit it off. We just hit it off. And as we're saying goodbye to each other, I said, hey, you know what we did with Tom? You want to maybe try something else? And he said, oh yeah, send something. Well, so you know me, you already know how presumptuous I am. I of course sent him an idea fairly soon.
Yeah.
And we worked on it. Went back and forth, created a piece. We did that, 2 or 3 pieces. And I said to him, are we making a record? He said, yeah, I think we are. And that was the beginning of Frio Suite. But we literally made it on our own terms. We had no deadline. We put no pressure on each other. And it was, for both of us, one of the most enjoyable experiences of music making we have ever had. And I think the music really reflects it. I think there's a calmness, a peacefulness, and a joy in that music that really comes through. And so we did that. And a few years later, I put it out on my ARC label. A few years later, I approached him, and Phil's always really busy. I mean, we're talking by, let's see, this was, it was, oh gosh, when was it? 2009 is when, 2008, 2009 is when we met at Laity, and Frio came out in 2009.
Right.
So we're talking 2012 now, and I've come up with a bunch of piano ideas that I think would be cool. But Phil's really busy, but he jumped in when he could, and then Water Sky came out of that. And then I had the really bad idea of us doing a tour. And we did a tour with Brian and Wendy, who were in my trio, but that was tough. That was tough. It was a lot of work. We didn't have the kind of support we needed just to do the tour. It was hard going, and some concerts were brilliant. And there was a nice little live recording that came out of it called Water Sky. But our friendship survived. That was the important thing, because there were moments where, by this time, Phil was really used to being on his own, touring on his own. And of course, he saw us. We had the trio thing. We were very much kind of our thing. And we made good music together, but it was just a tough tour, a lot of travel, a lot of flights and stuff like that. And so, it was at least 3 years before I could say, hey, I've got this, I've just come back from this place called Cappadocia, and I've got all of this amazing drone footage, and can I show you some of it? And Phil just fell in love with it. And that's how, that album was just an amazing experience. It was really a 50-50, whereas Water Sky had kind of been driven by me. Cappadocia was driven really by both of us. And then this new one, Ravenna, interestingly enough.
So this would be kind of number 4.
This is the 4th studio album, Ravenna, this new one. And of course, Cappadocia had just come out in 2019, and actually it still has a lot of legs. But you got the pandemic. And I asked Phil to be on one of these Sela video reflections that I know you want to ask me about later on, to be a featured guest. And so he had done that. And in the course of conversation, I said, are you doing anything? He said, no, everything's been canceled. I said, do you want to work on some new stuff? And he said, I'd love to. And the thing is that Phil just had nothing going on. His whole schedule was wiped out.
Yeah.
So this album is really a Phil Keaggy album with Jeff kind of doing whatever he can to be part of it. And it was such a fun experience for me, because Phil just had so many amazing ideas. And we worked on it from May to November. And for me, it literally kept me sane throughout the whole pandemic. So anyway, that was a bit long-winded, but that's basically the whole.
No. Well, we're let's see. I did want to ask you. You had mentioned something that I did want to ask you about, which is the Sela Video Reflections series. Now, here's what I did not know. I didn't know that you had been doing audio versions of this forever and a day, and have now switched over to the video medium. So, tell us a little bit about how the concept developed, and this line of work, so to speak, that you're
Right.
doing with these videos.
Well, 20 years ago, when I moved up to Camano Island, we moved up to be by our best friends, and we built a house right next to them here on Camano, David and Kathy Hastings. And David was a pastor at a church plant, American Baptist church plant, about an hour away from here. And so naturally we started working together. And one of the things that we wanted to do, we'd done a fair bit of traveling and had gone to places like Iona in Scotland. We'd been to the Taizé community in France, and a lot of Christian pilgrimage sites. And so we're very taken with that, and some of the liturgical elements, some of the what I would say the tradition of the Psalms and prayer in all of those traditions. And we wanted to do something, at least in their church, that would kind of be reflect that as artists and as musicians and as Christians. And so we started a service that we called Sela, which was a 1-hour service that I would use my own music, vocal, instrumental. We'd use Taizé choruses. We'd use hymns. There'd be a strong art element. So there'd be visually, there'd be neat things happening. And then there'd be this section of 10 minutes of silent prayer, which is very much like a Taizé service, if any of you have ever experienced that.
Uh-huh.
So literally a service started from that. But no sooner had we done a service at Faith Fellowship that Dave was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer and died in 6 months at 52 years old.
Oh my.
And so, as you can imagine, it was a very, very heavy season. But
Sure.
Sila and the expression of Sila being able to deal with eventually what became our deep grief when Dave died, it really impacted me, and to say the least. And so I have since then done these Sila services in churches, at retreats, as part of pilgrimage groups, all over the place, for mercy ships in Africa. And out of that, I wanted to create something in an audio format that would somehow emulate and reflect, give people a taste of what Sila is if you're actually physically together in the same space. So that's how the audio series began. And so it's always, there's always an emphasis. Each program emphasizes one psalm. And in some of the earlier ones, there's more music, and there's other readings, other prayers from Christian tradition and whatnot. But then when the pandemic started, this was before Phil and I started working on the Ravenna project, we're all kind of sitting, twiddling our thumbs going, what are we supposed to do? So you did this thing, that's what you did. What I did is I thought, well, I can't do Sila. We can't come together. We can't sing. We can't be in the same room. But I have all these wonderful friends and creatives all over the world. And I thought, well, why don't I try to do something with them? And so I started, the first episode featured Phil, and it just almost, what's the word I'm thinking of? Serendipitously,
Yep.
I got it. I sent a note to our mutual friend, the poet Malcolm Guide. And I said, Malcolm, I'm doing this. I sent this email to a bunch of people, but I'm doing this thing, and would you at all want to be interested? Would you be interested in being part of it? And he said, Jeff, this is amazing. I've just started this series of responses to the Psalms that I'm committed to writing a response for every single Psalm. And he said, I would love to be involved in it. So from the get-go, Malcolm's responses and him filming himself doing that were part of them. And so that's kind of the background in a nutshell, how those things originated. And I think I've done 9 now. Again, I'm not really I'm not pressuring myself to put them out every month kind of thing at this point. So, yeah.
Well, man, I have really, really enjoyed this visit. Honestly, I've learned more about you in the last hour than I have the last 10 years that I've known you.
Yeah.
It's just been a pleasure to talk to you. And I love your perspective. Sometimes the ruts on the road for me in terms of my perspective and my thought and my direction, I'd like to think I'm a reasonably generous guy and stuff, but sometimes I have my blind spots, my cranky moments, my what about this, what about that. And just hearing you talk about your commitment to the work, I think that one of the things that I love about what you do is because you draw, although you are inventing things in the present moment, you're drawing so much on the deep wells of the past, which is a not so subtle reminder that it is not part of our faith to say everything that happened before, we've improved upon that now, we finally got it right. I just want to thank God for how cool we are, but that we are to, as Chesterton talks about, we are to pay attention to the democracy of the dead, and we are to look at the history and the practices of the historic church, and to join and to literally link arms with them in this way. And so I just think that you're just one of the guys who just instinctively leads us in that direction and helps us to reconnect with I think the whole of the church and not just our little section.
That's sweet. And hey, I have a question for you. I don't know how much time you've got, but somebody asked on Facebook if I was going to perform or anything. And I said, well, Bob and I had some magic tricks that we were going to be working on to present as a joke. But hey, if I've got like 1 minute, I would love to sing a song. I never get a.
I would love, absolutely. Are you kidding me?
I get a chance. I can't put this song. I have a wonderful recording of it, but I can't put it out because it's owned by the Tolkien. It's part of the Tolkien canon, and I can't get permission. But I have this song that I've been doing for many, many years. I've got my bell right here. Oh, maybe
beautiful.
It's right here. And I just like to give this to you and give this to all your good people.
This would be a wonderful benediction, Jeff. Go for it.
Okay, here you go.
Here, hang on just a second. I'm going to switch you over to speaker view here, so people are not just looking at me, looking at you.
All right.
Okay.
All right. I think most people who know Tolkien will know where this comes from. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far away the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with earnest feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet. And whither then I cannot say.
Oh,
there you go.
Man.
Such great words, huh?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob. A real pleasure. And thanks everybody for listening. It's fun.